All right, y'all. So in the last lecture, you went over and took a quiz, and we talked about different typographers. William Caslon, which was the Caslon font, John Baskerville, Bodoni, Herman Zapt, who did several. We all know Zapt Dingbats, right? And on and on. Chichold, who was Sabon, Lublin, Gaudi. Who's that other dude? Jesus, I can't think of his name. Meininger, who was Helvetica font. Max, lots of Maxes. But what I'm going to talk about, or what we're going to talk about in this lecture 6, is the International Typographic Style. Or some ways we call them movements. All right, we're going to talk about different other Maxes, Max Bill, Max Huber, along with Ernst Keller, Theo Balmer. And these are gentlemen who took all that typography and then created these different styles based out of that. You were all familiar with more modern styles that you look into, but in this particular case, we're going to go back to the basics of what these graphic designers, in a sense, created. Okay, a little bit more. So in the 50s design movement, when it emerged from Switzerland and Germany, or the international typographic style, as we call it, became this major force into the 70s. So it still is an influence today. Then you've got the Swiss style movement as what it means. It's an asymmetrical unity through grid systems. Image and copy is presented in factual manner, free from exaggerated claims. Mostly sans serif typography expresses the spirit. Early pioneers defined the design as socially useful and an important activity. So let's talk about our first designer. Seen as the father of the Swiss style, Ernst Keller. What you're looking at on the right here is actually a poster for the Reitberg Museum, and it's got emblematic images that are energized by the repetitive geographic elements. Like I said, he was a graphic designer. He was also a lettering artist and a teacher. And from 1918, he taught at the Zurich, I'm not even going to pronounce it, free candy bar, who could ever pronounce it and get it right. But it's for the School of Applied Art, where he had developed a professional course in design and typography. Now you got to understand, guys, this is new and innovative stuff that's going on here. As a teacher, he was the most important single influence on the development of the Swiss style. Economically drawn images, innovative lettering of his posters designed in the 20s and 30s, it became an important contribution to modernism. So let's go ahead and break that imagery down and see what stands out about it. So Theo Balmer, he was actually an understudy because he taught under Ernst Keller, who we just discussed was the father of Swiss graphic design, in that Zurich School of Applied Art. But Balmer was known for really a student of Bauhaus. His posters in the 20s and 30s were famous, leaving his work as a photographer, lettering designer, teacher, jobbing typographer, almost unrecorded because of the popularity of his design. Shortest accounts of his career mention that he was a student of Bauhaus. In fact, he had went to the Bauhaus. He was already an established designer. Born in Bessel, and he was a lithographic draftsman in that city. What you're looking at on the right here is a poster for an office professions exhibition in 1928. What's cool here is you can actually see traces of the grid squares he used to construct the poster. He actually used them as part of the grid system. That's what those little white crosshair lines are separating it. Almost zero leading, right? But we can still see the actual verbiage and be able to, or the word, and be able to read it, which is very, very creative, very different. Um, I know you would see the very top right, the information, as like a morose like freak out because it's so close to the edges. In this particular case, I'm not sure if this was actually cut off and trimmed close because I have not seen the original, or there was some breathing room to begin with. But I think actually this is what it is. It was meant to create a little bit of stress here. Again, looking at this particular poster for a traveling exhibition in 1928, the mathematical construction is used, grid system, rather than an asymmetrical horizontals and verticals of like what we would call a de Stijl style or movement, which is more based on like more chaos. This is very, very structured. And again, using the grid system as part of the design. Max Bill. If you notice, these guys don't look like designers, huh? They almost look like they're math professors. But Max Bill, who was born in 1942, used mathematical precision to achieve his design. He's widely considered the single most decisive influence on Swiss graphic design, beginning in the 1950s, with his theoretical writings and progressive work. He called for a universal art of absolute clarity based on controlled mathematical construction. Although, if we look at this piece that he did on the right, it's asymmetrical in its view, but it's meant to be read right down the middle. We can kind of see the creative harmony and order in the asymmetrical layout. It's meant to be read right down the center. And truly we start with the thick, right? We're talking about focal point here and dominance at that top, and then we read straight down through with that big negative space ending at the very bottom with just small centered, slightly off-centered bold type. So again, Max Bill had a lot of accreditations. I'll let you read those. But he did write and lecture extensively on art, architecture, and design. He would appear in symposiums and design conferences around the world. He wrote books about Kandinsky, Ludwig Miles, Le Corbusier, Van der Rohe, and artistic theory in general. This poster that you see here that was done in 1945, look at how, again, this is called, well, they're on the diamond shape. I'll get back to it. The photographs they form a wedge, and some of the photographs are placed on the white ground to equalize a figure and ground. Okay. Duotone was that word I was trying to come up with. You can kind of see that was a style that was just coming out back then. Now what you guys is just basically a filter. You guys can do that very quickly. But what do we think about this? Talk about it. So Max Huber, his photo resembles his work. His graphic work is considered bright, sharp, always surprising, very effective. He had this knack for combining painting and photography with other graphic media, and he remained avant-garde throughout his career, and he brought this utopian vision of such legends as Herbert Bayer, Mahatma Gandhi, to bear on corporate typography and brand design. He moved a lot. He was in Switzerland during the Second World War, and he worked in this alliance, and then he moved back to Italy after the war, receiving different commissions. In 1946, he had asked Huber to renew the typography of his Milan-based publishing house. It was at that time Huber became acquainted with a circle of brilliant left-wing intellectual artists. And he would collaborate with these particular artists. He had also had a long-standing collaboration with the Castelloni brothers and later won a first prize in a competition for a poster Monza Grand Prix. What you're looking at on the right here is a yearbook cover in 1951, and it shows an informal balance of halftones printed in red, black, and blue, combined with the yellow rectangles to turn the space into an energy-charged field. So on the right, what you're looking at is that first prize that he won for that Monza Grand Prix that you see here with all the sense of motion going through. And then there's a poster for, I'm trying to pronounce it here, Borsalino hats in 1949, and the design devices below that the hat helped unify the posters when hung in a row together. So again, kind of like I've mentioned in package design, how is it going to look on the shelves when you go to look at that cereal aisle, I think, so to speak, right? You don't see one row of Cheerios. You see probably 6 rows of Cheerios. Then you see another 6 rows of Honey Nut Cheerios and another 4 rows of like the 4 or 5 different kinds of Cheerios they have now. And how will those all blend together to unify and draw even more attention based on the repetition of poster after poster? So the next couple slides are about Anton Stankowski. So he was a German graphic designer, photographer, and painter. He was known for developing an original theory of design and pioneered constructive graphic art. What he worked on was more to illustrate behavior rather than physical object. What did we feel, right? Has anybody ever been to the, what's that children's museum there with the upside down house? And when you first get in there, right, it looks like you're going down this narrow corridor and it's dissipating and you get all discombobulated. It kind of relates to that. If you're looking at this one to the right, it is a trademark standard electric Lorentz. Dynamic equilibrium is achieved by asymmetrical construction in an implied square, signifying communications, transmission, and reception. Very disjointed in how he did his things. That's how he was able to create and get the results of these fractal-like structures long before they became popular. This is the one that you see on the next slide is a cover for a Berlin layout, and the vertical lines represented the Berlin Wall. The name Berlin was set in Aaken's Grotesque, which was the front runner to Helvetica, and was always on the right. So Adrian Frutiger, some of you might mention the name because one of his famous fonts was after his namesake. I'll talk about it in a second. His forte was typeface designing, and he was considered responsible for the advancement of typography into the digital typography. His valued contribution to typography includes Typefaces, Universe, and Frutiger, but he did gain inspiration through others. What we're looking at here is Universe font to the right and the different styles and thicknesses. Universe 53, 63, and you can see they get thicker as they go. And that was the family. They had 21 variations. So the French Airport Authority commissioned him to work for the Charles de Gaulle International Airport. He was required to design a wayfinding signage alphabet in such a way that was both legible from afar and from any angle. He was going to use Universe typeface and then thought it might be a little outdated. Then he took the matter and fused it with, Gill Sans, which was Eric Gill's design. And the result of that typeface was what he called Frutiger in 1976, and it was released for public use. Again, it was originally titled Rossi, but you know it as Frutiger. Okay, Edward Hoffman and Max Meininger. Max Meiniger, we should all know because of Helvetica. That's what you see here. There was actually a simplistic version released in 1961 by what's called the Stempel Foundry. And what you're looking at here is some variations that were developed later. And in 1956, Meiniger had returned home to Zurich to become a freelance advertising consultant and graphic designer. Edward Hoffman was the head of Haas Type Foundry and was convinced of his talent, and shortly thereafter commissioned him to design a new sans serif typeface called Neuhaus Grotesque in 1965. But we understand Helvetica as being like, survey says number one answer kind of a font. It's what? Either Helvetica or Times usually nowadays. Now Hermann Zapf. Some of you right out of the gate, right? Zapf Dingbats, Zapfino, Palatino, Optima. These are all fonts that he did. He did Palatino in 1950, Optima in 1958, and these alphabets have harmony, elegance, seldom achieved by normal typeface design. Palatino was his breakthrough font, a much copied classical Roman design adapted for 20th century. It was available on Microsoft Word and from Linotype and other sources as being used by Abercrombie & Fitch for its corporate logo. Optima, a font I actually personally like, is a revolutionary font that melded the thick and thin strokes of a traditional typeface with sans serif design, even though it doesn't look like a typical sans serif font. It was used in Estee Lauder's cosmetics company on its packaging. He had another font called Melior, and it was a serif type design for newspapers, including the Village Voice, which it was used for years. On the next slide, you'll see some of Hermann Zapf's pages from a manual typographicum in 1968. It was a Paradowski quotation about the power of the printed word to govern time and space. It was inspired by this. On the left, he had organized a page with classical symmetry and exquisite intervals between the letters. The one on the right, we can kind of see this field of tension radiating from the central cluster, and then almost like a explosion bursting outward. So Emil Rutter, he had this belief that type loses its purpose when it loses its communicative meaning. What you're looking at here is this eye chart looking thing is again one of his designs, and we can see it's all reversed, but it's still legible. So he had a book cover, is what this was, a manual for design. And the book is the most important on international style. No other designer since Chithold was as committed as Rutter to the discipline of letterpress typography. During post-war years, when it was almost every field of applied art, there was still no sign of transition to a new form of expression better fitted to the times. Rutter was one of those first pioneers to discard all the conventional rules of traditional typography and then establish these new laws of composition more in accord with modern era. In spite of his bent pictorial thinking, he is never tempted to indulge in merely playful designs in which the actual purpose of printing, which we know as legibility, is lost. Armin Hoffman, on the other hand, if we look at this poster for the Basile Theater production of Giselle in 1959, very organic in its sense, right? Lots of contrast. Look at the Giselle and the font choice compared to the blurred, soft image to the right of it of, I would only assume, the ballet dancer. using this contrast and soft edges to create an artistic look. He had began a career in 1947 as a teacher in this Basel School of Art and Crafts at the age of 26. He had followed Amir Rutter as the head of the graphic design department at that Basel school, and he was instrumental in developing the graphic design style or movement known as Swiss. His independent insights as an educator, married with rich and innovative powers of visual expression, helped him to create a body of work enormously varied in books, exhibitions, stage sets, typography, posters, sign systems, environmental graphics, you name it. His work is recognized for the reliance on the fundamental elements of graphic form, point, line, and shape. But the subtlety conveying the simplicity, complexity, and representation and abstraction is what kind of blends and makes it cool. So this Vivarelli poster that you see was bringing awareness to elderly and their problems. If we haven't learned anything so far in our first year, we understand that black and white photography is very, very powerful. It creates a lot of emotion. Our human eye is attracted because of what? We have the rods and cones, but we have millions of rods that pick up the peripheral and pick up the contrast of light. And Vivarelli was a Swiss graphic designer and an exponent of the movement of concrete Kunst and Swiss school. He used photography and photomontage and typography tools to get these combinations of shapes and colors according to a mathematical rigor inspired by neo-constructivism Russian. So what he did in this poster was, again, contrasting the juxtaposition of an organic human and the textured photograph, along with sharp geometric typography, which would intensify when brought together the meaning of both. So this is Joseph Müller Brockmann. He was a Swiss graphic designer and a teacher. He studied architecture, design, and history of art in Zurich. He opened a studio in 1936, specializing in graphic design, exhibition design, and photography. Then in 1951, he started to produce concert posters. In 1958, he became an editor of this new graphic design along with, C. Vivarelli and R.P. Loos and H. Neuenberg. And in 1966, he was appointed to the European Design Consultants to IBM. He's recognized for simple designs, clean use of typography, shapes and colors which would inspire many graphic designers in the 21st century. He was the author of several books, and the poster that you're looking at here was a Swiss Auto Club poster. And that gigantic hand was considered a friendly hand sign that protects against accidents. And the photograph was meant to amplify the text, as you can see as it lines up with the thumb and the pointer finger, right? We always try to connect on a line or to points, and in this case, that's how we did the hand. In the next slide, you can see Joseph Müller Brockmann, a 1960 awareness poster. The red type declared less noise is what it stands for, while the photograph graphically depicts the discomfort of that noise. And then on the right, it was a concert poster in 1959. The colored squares march in a musical rhythm on the tilted white square. Typography and shapes align in a harmonious juxtaposition. All right, let's talk about our first female graphic designer, Rosemarie Tissy. She practiced and taught and lectured in Belzati's neck of the woods at the Rhode Island School of Design and at Yale University. She was a member of several juries for the design competitions in Germany, Japan, Switzerland, and in the USA. She actually designed as an expression, personal expression. So she had moved from modern attitude towards functionality and neutrality to an individualistic graphic language that expressed her personality through dynamic layouts of vivid color, type experimentation. Her best projects offer that interesting and original contribution to that Swiss graphic design heritage. And then you can see a calendar design that she has here to the left, if you want to discuss. So Jacqueline Casey, our second female graphic designer, um, was best known for posters that she had created for MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She was born in 1927 in Quincy, Massachusetts, studied Bachelor of Fine Art degree in fashion design and illustration at the Massachusetts College of Art. And she, just like all of us, go through a bunch of different jobs, including working as an interior designer, as an advertiser. But like I've told you all in the past, all of this one builds upon the other, and this is how you get your knowledge, create style, and continue to learn. She was recruited by a Massachusetts Art of College alumni, Muriel Cooper. In 1972, Casey had become director, taking over the position as her colleague joined the MIT faculty. So the two women were among the few working in the profession level at MIT at the time. What we're looking at to the right here is an announcement for the MIT Ocean Engineering Program in 1967. It's a typography that sits above an X-ray of a chambered Nautilus shell, which was in turn superimposed on a wave-like repetition of fluid blue shapes. To me, that looks like maybe it was cut paper, scanned, brought into Photoshop, or not Photoshop, but somehow manipulated and then through a series of amberlith, rubylith marked off, creating a duotone in different colors, giving it that look. And then the type above, taking advantage of the structured columns of the top half and drawing attention, using that negative space to create a positive area. And those rectangular boxes that the type creates draws your eye back in again, but not enough to keep pulling you back down. So there's a nice asymmetrical balance between the two.